We all lie. Don't look at the screen like you don't. You've told your boss you had stomach issues when you just wanted to play video games. You've told your aunt her gelatinous cranberry surprise was so unique. But those are amateur lies, minor league fibs. Today, my friends, we are talking about the major leagues. We are talking about a lie so grand, so majestic, so undeniably ridiculous, that it managed to pry open the heavy mahogany doors of New York's most exclusive penthouses, solely through the sheer, unadulterated power of weaponized name-dropping. Welcome back to the Audacity of Him. I'm your host, and today we are traveling back to the early 1980s, a magical, terrifying time. The cocaine was pure, the shoulder pads could double as flotation devices, and the elite citizens of Manhattan lived in an impenetrable bubble of wealth and status. It was a world that required a golden ticket to enter. But a 19-year-old kid from Buffalo named David Hampton didn't have a golden ticket. He didn't have a silver spoon. What he had was a brain, a preppy sweater, and a realization that would change high society forever. Rich people will believe absolutely anything if you just sound confident enough and mention a famous person. He decided he wasn't David Hampton anymore. He was David Poitier, the son of the legendary Oscar-winning actor Sidney Poitier. And using this entirely fabricated identity, he went on a mooching spree so legendary, so bizarre, and so unbelievably bold that it inspired a Pulitzer-nominated play and a blockbuster Hollywood movie. He ate their caviar, he slept in their silk sheets, he hung out with Calvin Klein, he scammed Melanie Griffith, and he did it all without breaking a sweat. This is the story of the teenager who conned New York high society. To truly appreciate the artistry of David Hampton's con, you have to understand the technological landscape of 1983. I need you Zoomers in the audience to brace yourselves, because this is going to sound like ancient mythology. In 1983, there was no Google, there was no Wikipedia, there was no Instagram to check if someone was at a party, there was no LinkedIn to verify someone's employment. If someone walked up to you on the street and said, "Hello, I am the Duke of Earl, and I am the inventor of the toaster," you basically had two options. You could either go to the local library, consult a Dewey Decimal Catalog, find an encyclopedia, and spend 4 hours researching peerages and kitchen appliance patents, or you could just say, "Wow, an honor to meet you, Your Grace. Would you like a canapé?" People chose the canapé, always. Society ran on the honor system, especially high society. The rich elite of New York City operated as an exclusive club. They assumed that if you knew the right words, wore the right Brooks Brothers jacket, and had the right accent, you belonged. Because who would dare fake it? Who would have the sheer, unmitigated gall to walk into the lion's den wearing a meat suit and claim to be the king of the jungle? David Hampton would. Born in Buffalo, New York in 1964, David was the son of an attorney. He wasn't exactly destitute, but he wasn't eating truffles off gold plates either. He was smart, highly observant, and fiercely ambitious. When he moved to New York City as a teenager, he wanted a taste of the good life. He wanted the glitz, the glamour, the velvet ropes parting like the Red Sea. But New York in the 80s was a fortress of exclusivity. To get into places like Studio 54, you either had to be famous, impossibly beautiful, or dangerously rich. One night, David and a friend tried to get into a legendary club. The bouncer, doing his job of keeping the riffraff out, gave them the standard, "Not tonight, kids," routine. David's friend, desperate and thinking on his feet, pointed to David and blurted out, "You can't turn us away. Do you know who this is? This is David Poitier, Sidney Poitier's son." Now, let's pause and analyze this moment. This is the big bang of the con. The bouncer stops. The gears turn in his head. Sidney Poitier, the legendary actor, the star of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and In the Heat of the Night? I can't reject Hollywood royalty. The velvet rope was unclipped. They were ushered inside. They were treated like VIPs. And in that dark, thumping, neon-lit nightclub, David Hampton had an epiphany. It was a matrix-shattering realization. The name Poitier was a magic spell. It was a skeleton key to the city. He didn't need money. He just needed the illusion of proximity to fame. The Audacity was born. Now, picking Sidney Poitier as your fake dad is an absolute masterstroke of psychological manipulation. Why? Because David Hampton was targeting a very specific demographic: wealthy, white, liberal, Upper East Side Manhattanites. These were the cultural elites, the publishing magnates, the Broadway producers, the fashion designers. They prided themselves on being progressive, cultured, and worldly. But they lived incredibly insulated lives. Sidney Poitier was a revered, barrier-breaking Black icon. He was universally respected. If a young, well-spoken Black kid showed up on their doorstep claiming to be Sidney Poitier's son, these wealthy elites were not going to interrogate him. They weren't going to ask for a birth certificate. Why? For two reasons. Reason number one: star chasing. Rich people love nothing more than being adjacent to celebrities. It's the ultimate currency in a world where everyone already has money. Having Sidney Poitier's son on your sofa is an incredible anecdote for your next cocktail party. Reason number two: the guilt. The fear of looking prejudiced or unwelcoming to the son of a civil rights icon. To slam the door on David Poitier would be a social faux pas of epic proportions. And there was one more crucial, hilarious detail that made this scam possible. A detail that could have been debunked in 3 seconds today, but was a total blind spot in 1983. Sidney Poitier didn't have a son. He had daughters, 6 of them in fact. No sons whatsoever. But again, pre-internet. Unless you were the president of the Sidney Poitier fan club and kept a scrapbook of his family tree under your bed, you wouldn't know that. And the elites of Manhattan certainly didn't know it. They just accepted the premise blindly. It was the perfect storm of gullibility. So, David had his character. Now he needed a script. He couldn't just knock on random doors and say, "Hi, I'm famous, feed me." He needed a hook. He needed an inciting incident. He needed to be a victim in distress, because there is no faster way to disarm a rich person than by activating their savior complex. David's methodology was brilliant in its simplicity. First, he needed marks. How do you find the addresses of the ultra-rich? Remember, he couldn't just Google, "Where does Calvin Klein live?" No, David did it the old-fashioned way. He stole an address book. Legend has it he swiped a Rolodex or a personal address book from a student at Connecticut College. This book was a treasure map. It contained the names, addresses, and phone numbers of the parents of wealthy college students. It was an index of the Manhattan elite. Armed with his treasure map, David would select a target. He'd wait until late evening, when people were home, relaxed, and perhaps a glass or two of Chardonnay deep. He would show up at a sprawling Park Avenue apartment or an Upper East Side townhouse and ring the buzzer. The doorman or the homeowner would answer, and there stood David. Dressed impeccably, always wearing a button-down shirt, maybe a tasteful sweater draped over his shoulders, but looking panicked, exhausted, and frantic. He would introduce himself as David Poitier. He would then drop a name from the stolen address book. "I'm a friend of your son. We go to Harvard together," he would claim. Or, "I'm a friend of your daughter from Connecticut College." Then, the sob story. The pièce de résistance. "I am so sorry to intrude," David would say, his voice trembling with perfectly calibrated anxiety. "But I have just been mugged. They took my luggage, my wallet, my ID, everything. My father, Sidney, is flying into the city tomorrow to meet me, but right now I have nowhere to go. I remembered your child talking so fondly of you, and I didn't know who else to turn to in this massive, terrifying city." Let's break down the sheer weaponized genius of this script. 1. He establishes high status, Poitier. 2. He establishes a personal connection, I know your kid. 3. He creates an urgent crisis, I was mugged. 4. He flatters their ego, your kid thinks you're wonderful and safe. 5. He sets a time limit to reassure them he won't be a burden, my dad is coming tomorrow. It was flawless. It bypassed every single logical defense mechanism these people had. They didn't call the police to report the mugging. They didn't call their kids to verify the friendship. They simply opened the door, handed him a towel, and asked if he liked his eggs scrambled or poached. Once David got his foot in the door, the real performance began. He wasn't just a freeloader, he was an entertainer. He cooked for them. He regaled them with fabricated stories of growing up in Hollywood, of his father's upcoming film projects, of hanging out with the elite of Los Angeles. He was charming, articulate, and immensely likable. He conned his way into the home of Gary Sinise, yes, Lieutenant Dan himself. At the time, Sinise was a rising star in the theater world. David pulled the mugged and stranded routine, and Sinise, being a decent guy, let him in. He fed him, gave him a place to sleep, and probably gave him some profound acting advice, not realizing he was talking to a guy who was currently giving the greatest acting performance in the history of the tri-state area. He targeted fashion royalty. He allegedly pulled the scam on Calvin Klein. Imagine having the stones to walk up to Calvin Klein, a man whose name is literally printed on the underwear of half the planet, and tell him you need cab fare because you lost your wallet in Central Park. And Calvin Klein, operating under the assumption that he was helping a fellow member of the celebrity aristocracy, supposedly obliged. He even tangled with Hollywood starlet Melanie Griffith. According to the lore, he met her at a party, struck up a conversation, and successfully positioned himself as an insider. He hung out with her, drank her booze, and basked in the glow of the A-list, all while essentially being a broke teenager from upstate New York. He would stay for a night or two, borrow some cash, usually $50 or $100, claiming his dad would reimburse them instantly upon arrival, and then he would vanish into the Manhattan smog, off to his next target. He was a phantom of the opera, if the phantom was obsessed with name-dropping and stealing loose 20s from entry hall tables. But every winning streak has to end. You can only spin the roulette wheel so many times before it lands on 00. And for David Hampton, 00 came in the form of Osborne Elliott and his wife, Inger McCabe Elliott. Osborne Elliott was a big deal. He was the former editor of Newsweek and the dean of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. He was a man whose entire career was built on fact-checking, investigating, and seeking the truth. So, naturally, he was the perfect person to completely and utterly fall for the scam. David showed up at their apartment. He used a name from his magic address book, a friend of the Elliott's children. He spun the tale of woe, the mugging, the missing luggage, Sidney Poitier flying in the next morning from Paris. The Elliots, proving that an Ivy League education does not protect you from a world-class grifter, welcomed him with open arms. They gave him a meal. They gave him a guest bedroom. They gave him money. They even let him stay the next day. It was the classic Hampton operation running at peak efficiency, until the morning of the second day. Osborne and Inger woke up. They went to check on their esteemed guest, young Master Poitier. They opened the door to the guest room, and there, in their pristine Upper East Side bed, was David Hampton, and another man he had picked up the night before and smuggled into the apartment. The audacity, the absolute, unmitigated gall. It's one thing to con your way into a millionaire's home using a fake identity. It is an entirely different level of disrespect to use their guest room as your own personal bachelor pad while you're supposedly traumatized from a mugging. The Elliots were furious. They kicked David and his guest out immediately. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The illusion was cracked. Inger Elliott, feeling a mix of violation and confusion, decided to do what nobody else had done for months. She decided to make a phone call. She reached out to a friend in her social circle who actually knew Sidney Poitier. The conversation went something like this. "Darling, the most bizarre thing happened. Sidney Poitier's son, David, was staying with us. It was lovely until it wasn't. Have you met him?" "Inger, darling, are you day drinking again? Sidney Poitier doesn't have a son." The jig was up. The Elliots started calling their friends. "Did you have a David Poitier stay with you?" "Yes, he said he was mugged. He took $50 from me. He ate my last tin of beluga caviar." The elite whisper network activated. The stories poured in. Dozens of people had been scammed by the exact same kid with the exact same story. The sheer volume of victims was staggering. It turned out, when you combine extreme wealth with a desperate need to feel culturally relevant, you create the perfect all-you-can-eat buffet for a con artist. The police were called. The authorities began tracking down the phantom Poitier. In October 1983, David Hampton was finally arrested. He was charged with grand larceny, burglary, and a slew of other offenses related to his high society joyride. When he was caught, you'd think he'd be apologetic. You'd think he'd show some remorse. But remember the name of this channel, The Audacity of Him. David didn't break character. He was arrogant, he was defiant. He essentially looked at the police and the judges and said, "Yeah, I did it, and they fell for it. That's on them." He was ordered to pay restitution to his victims. Did he? Of course not. He was eventually sentenced to 21 months in prison for his crimes. But the story didn't end behind bars. Because while David Hampton was sitting in a cell, the true cultural phenomenon of his grift was just beginning to take shape. Enter John Guare. John Guare was a celebrated playwright, and, more importantly for this story, he was good friends with Osborne and Inger Elliott. When the Elliots told Guare the story of the charming, sociopathic teenager who conned his way into their bed and convinced half of Manhattan he was Hollywood royalty, Guare didn't see a crime. He saw a masterpiece. Guare recognized the profound psychological commentary embedded in the scam. He saw how the con exposed the guilt, the isolation, and the desperate yearning for connection among the upper class. He took Hampton's story and turned it into the play 6 Degrees of Separation. The play premiered in 1990. It starred the brilliant Stockard Channing. It was an instant smash hit. It was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. It won a Tony. It explored the idea that everyone in the world is connected by just 6 people, a theory perfectly demonstrated by a kid who used an address book to link himself to the most powerful people in the city. The play was later adapted into a highly successful film in 1993, bringing the story of the fake Poitier to a global audience. Now, how do you think David Hampton reacted to his life of crime being turned into a critically acclaimed, money-making Broadway sensation? Was he flattered? Did he realize the irony? No, he was furious. He believed he was the author of that story. He was the one who did the legwork. He was the one who risked going to jail. He was the one who had to eat awkward dinners with boring rich people. How dare they profit off his genius? And so, David Hampton initiated the ultimate metacon. He started harassing the playwright, John Guare. He would show up at the theater. He would call Guare's home. He became a stalker, demanding his cut of the profits. Then, in a move of absolutely breathtaking delusion, David Hampton filed a $100 million lawsuit against John Guare, the producers of the play, and the theater company. Let me repeat that. A convicted con artist sued a playwright for $100 million for stealing the copyright to his illegal scam. He claimed they had stolen his persona, his life rights, and his intellectual property. The courts, unsurprisingly, did not agree. A judge dismissed the lawsuit, essentially stating, "You cannot copyright a crime spree, you absolute lunatic." The harassment continued until Guare had to take out a restraining order against him. It was a dark, bizarre coda to a story that started as a farcical romp. The aftermath of the 6 Degrees saga wasn't glamorous for David Hampton. The 90s arrived. The internet began to creep into homes. The golden age of the blind grift was ending. You couldn't just claim to be someone's son anymore. People could look it up. The world got smaller, and the cracks in the system that David had so brilliantly exploited began to seal shut. He couldn't escape his reputation. He was no longer the charming unknown. He was the famous con artist. He bounced around, still trying to pull minor scams, still trying to dine out on his infamy, but the magic was gone. The charm had curdled into bitterness. He struggled with the law, with his health, and with the reality that his greatest performance was behind him. In 2003, David Hampton died of complications from AIDS at a hospital in Manhattan. He was only 39 years old. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the sheer, unadulterated audacity of David Hampton. A story so crazy, it practically demands a standing ovation. Just make sure you check your wallet after you clap. What did you think of David's master scam? If a guy showed up at your door claiming to be the son of a celebrity, who would he have to name for you to let him in? Let me know in the comments down below. I read all of them. If you enjoyed diving into this rabbit hole of high society grift, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an episode of The Audacity of Him, where we celebrate history's boldest, brashest, and most unbelievable liars. Until next time, keep your friends close, keep your Rolodex closer, and always, always verify before you let someone sleep in your guest bed. Stay audacious, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.